capacity for self-government, or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
It's Friday. It's Friday. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us. You found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Oh, what, my fault. That's my fault. Sorry, we had some feedback there. The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We're building a liberty machine this morning. And always, if you want to contribute to the program, you can do so. The phone number is 870-275-9799. You can sound off over at facebook.com/Conduit News. We were a little bit late getting the stream up, had a little some technical difficulties, but it's up and going now, and should be good to go across all platforms. Live stream, conduitnews.com, Facebook, and YouTube. If you watch over on the YouTube channel, Conduit News, make sure you subscribe and then click the little bell to receive notifications. For example, let me just educate you as to how that might play out in your life practically if you go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. So we interviewed earlier this week Congressman Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You probably see him a whole lot on Sean Hannity's show. He is instrumental in bringing to light a lot of what we know today about what the FBI officials did and senior Justice Department officials did to the Trump campaign and everything else. By the way, I read this amazing article over at realclearinvestigations.com that was then reposted over at sarahcarter.com that was extremely detailed about how the mainstream, or how the Justice Department and FBI officials are leaking things to the media in an unprecedented way. And now, of course, they used to be doing that, and now they're more on the defense, is what the article talks about, and how some of them may actually be cooperating because they know that they're in trouble. Well, let me tell you how it would play out. We did the interview with Devin Nunes. We got it. We put the we put the little clip up on the YouTube channel, and if you are a subscriber to our YouTube channel, you would have gotten access to that information while he was in Arkansas. When he was in Arkansas, you would have gotten it much earlier than having to wait until the following morning to where it was broadcast on our radio program and across the terrestrial radio stations in Arkansas that are really awesome for carrying the program. So that's just one practical way. And so there are other videos and things like that that get uploaded that don't necessarily make it on the program. So just make sure you check it out, Conduit News YouTube page. Okay. With all of that being said, it's Friday, and that means it's Johnny Cash Friday. And so for our terrestrial radio audience, you guys get to listen to as much Johnny Cash music as we can, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day and the week. Maybe the month, who knows? Who knows? I don't know if we'll have enough time. But you guys get to listen to Johnny Cash music. Our Facebook audience this morning during our online breaks, our affiliate breaks, you guys are going to be listening to the 1962 speech of President John Kennedy saying the bold concept, communicating that, hey, we're going to go to the moon. And so I'm excited for that one. That's actually a great speech. Okay, let's start at the, I don't know, man. There's so much to get to here. Just real quick, let's go over the steak news here. If you go to conduitnews.com, it's amazing the last couple of stories that have come out at conduitnews.com. Go ahead and throw that up on the screen, Joe. Obviously, we see the Devin Nunes interview. That's still pretty prominent that we got the earlier in the week. But then you look at it, I mean, you had Micah Neal, who was sentenced yesterday, okay? Then you have John Woods, who was sentenced. Then you have Randall Shelton, who was sentenced. I mean, I know those three photos there of those three politicians/lobbyists are not mugshots, but they might as well be. I mean, the story of Arkansas corruption continues to unfold, and we're seeing it in the headlines every single day. And now that we have the brand new conduitnews.com, we're able to actually really conceptualize all of that, into one big picture. Now, we're going to talk more about the sentencing of State Representative Micah Neal at 7 o'clock. Mr. Josh Waters will join us, and we'll talk more about that. He was in the courtroom, and there's a great story up, detailed story, about what Judge Tim Brooks said to Micah Neal, what Micah Neal said to the court. In short, Micah Neal will see no jail time. So State Representative Micah Neal gets 3 years probation with 1 year of house confinement. That's the news for Arkansas. It's probably the biggest story in the state right now. And this is important, and I'll tell you why. You know, if I wanted to sensationalize this story, I could tell you how outraged I am that Micah Neal's not going to jail, but I'm not going to do that because I'm not outraged. Now, some of you may be, and I understand that, because this is a guy who stole money. This is a guy who took taxpayer money. He funneled it to certain entities like a school, a college, a Christian college, and was getting kickbacks from it. But he was also the first guy, years ago at this point, he was the first guy that actually went to the government when he got wind that there was an investigation and said, hey, yeah, I did it. I want to plea here, and I'll roll on everybody else. The fact that he gets no jail time, what kind of message does that send to other people who might be thinking of doing something similar? I mean, think about this. Because Micah Neal did what he did, meaning because he actually went to the government and admitted everything, John Woods is in jail, is going to go to jail for 18 years. Now, that is incredible if you think about it. That's a long time. Randall Shelton's going to jail for 6 years for his crimes. And Micah Neal here is apparently assisting with other investigations. The Arkansas Democrat-Gazette reporting that the Western District Prosecuting Attorney, U.S. Attorney Dak Keese, they're reporting that there are more indictments to come. He wouldn't say anything else, but there are more indictments to come. This is interesting because Conduit News, I believe at the sentencing of John Woods or Randall Shelton last week, Conduit News asked Dak Keese after the sentencing hearing, will there be any more people that are going to be charged based on Ecclesia College, within the confines of Ecclesia College? And Dak Keese said he can't comment on that right now. So, and I want to actually find the exact quote. I need to get that here in just a minute. But anyway, so it's big stuff. We're going to talk about that at 7:05 with Mr. Josh Waters. Then at 7:33, Congressman Rick Crawford will be calling in. Always great to talk to him. You know, that's why Devin Nunes came to Arkansas, was because Congressman Rick Crawford. They both serve on the House Intelligence Committee together. So we'll definitely talk about that. Here's a national headline for you that's pretty outrageous. I saw this one yesterday. Twitter has blocking posts that use the phrase illegal alien, and they're saying that using the phrase, a legal term, by the way, an illegal alien is not slander, it's not hate speech, it's a legal phrase. They're saying that it's hateful content. And this had to do with basically an outfit wanted to pay Twitter to promote tweets, because you can do this. You can pay Twitter and have your tweets promoted outside of your follower base. And it had to do with, illegal alien imagery. It was basically highlighting the fact that our immigration system is out of whack when it comes to people pouring across the border. And because they used the phrase illegal alien, Twitter flagged it and rejected the ad. There's a little bit more of a detailed story about this if you head on over to the Epoch Times, or the Epic Times here. Twitter blocks ads with words illegal alien, then reverses decision. They say that they made a mistake. So now they've reversed their decision. I will tell you this: we have seen this a lot. We have these social media giants, these Silicon Valley giants, who are colluding with one another, making sure there is no diversity of political opinion, making sure that it's only the political opinions that they agree with, that they feel are acceptable, that don't offend you. No one is, if you get offended by something, no one is hurt, by the way. There's no actual damage if you get offended by something in your day-to-day lives. If you get offended, there's no actual harm done if you offend somebody. I think we need to say that at this point, in the legal sense, with the concept of freedom and the concept of a free society, that you don't outlaw offending somebody, okay? Because that's not free. That's what other countries do, and we're really dangerously teetering on on the cliff here when it comes to this kind of stuff. Yeah. This is the kind of stuff that Canada does. Okay, you're exactly right, and that's one of the reasons Jordan Peterson is so famous right now is because he stood up and he said, "No, you're not going to compel me to use certain words. You can't compel speech. You can't make me say what you want me to say. Basically, bow down to this altar of political correctness because if I see the world differently and I express that, then all of a sudden I'm doing something illegal because it disagrees with the norm. No, that's not a free society. You do not have a right to not be offended as you go about your day-to-day lives." But they've reversed their decision. We're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing a lot of these people who are in these Silicon Valley companies, and they are censoring conservatives left and right, and then they reverse their decision once they're called out on it. And you know what that shows? It shows that Google, Facebook, Twitter, these people are very worried. They're starting to get worried that there will be coming regulation of some kind in the future. And I want to talk just a little bit more about that coming up. I want to expand on that because I was trying to conceptualize how do we move forward with something that we've never truly experienced, where the internet is now the mechanism, it is now the vehicle of political speech. And we've never had anything like this in our time where, I mean, imagine a time before the internet where people would just go out and they would picket, they would protest this public building or that public building. And imagine before the internet, if you had the ability to see it, if you had the ability to know, well, Johnny who lives 1,000 miles away, I just saw that he's outside and he's got a sign that reads XYZ and it's some political, we now have that. We now have this global connection where you can see what people are doing. And if you really want to know Google's intentions are really they'll just do whatever they need to do to make money. And what I mean by that is, they're helping China create a censored version of Google, and it's made some people in Google upset, but then they're not upset when they censor conservative opinions or they censor, or whatever Twitter's doing. But I think that they realize that what is happening now is there's an incredible amount of power that has been consolidated, that has been centralized with the Silicon Valley companies. And I know what you're going to say because that's what I want to say. But, Paul, these are private companies. These companies, are private property. They have rights. Yes, in theory. But this is not some sort of – we're not talking about small businesses here at this point. And we're going into uncharted territory. I don't really know what the answer is, if there is an answer, but you're going into uncharted territory. You could say, well, just start up your own Twitter, Facebook, Google. Well, I mean, are you not going to be dependent on Google to get your new Facebook in the top of the search results? I guess my point is, at what point do we say, hey, you know what, this is a monopoly? And the amount of power that's being amassed here where somebody can put their finger on a button and all of a sudden censor content just based on the fact that you disagree with it. I mean, we're not even talking about fake news anymore, are we? We're talking about, it's gone from we lost the election, Hillary Clinton lost the election because there was too much freedom on Facebook, there was too many stories on Facebook that we think are fake, and we now need to monitor them and everything else. Okay, we've gone from that now to, illegal aliens is offensive, let's get rid of that. Well, illegal aliens is a legal phrase that is used in our laws, in court decisions. It's how it's a part of our code. Well, no, it's offensive. These people, they really believe that middle America, flyover country, has too much freedom when it comes to using their products. Again, I'm not sure what the answer is specifically, but it's very worrisome. Because if you are a radical leftist and you're at the head of these Silicon Valley companies, like many, they are let's be honest, they're radical leftists. I think they're socialists, communists, Marxists. They really believe that we should be forced to put all of our money into one big pot and then divide it up equally. Like that's going to work. The question isn't why would you do that? Why would you put your finger on the scales and you know, try to control what people are thinking? The question is, why wouldn't you do it? Because the ends justify the means to these people. Because they know, you know, if everybody has, if the people have the facts the way they are, they know that most of the people are in this country are conservative-minded in terms of, if you just give them the facts, they're going to make their minds up, make their conclusions up for what, you know, for themselves, and those conclusions are going to be ones that are bent towards appreciating voluntary cooperation and not forced cooperation. And that really, in a nutshell, is what a lot of this is about, right? Okay, the people didn't vote for Hillary; they had the freedom and they voted for Trump. Well, now we've got to create some choice architecture here, and we got to make sure that the Democrats take the House of Representatives. Anyway, feel free to check this story out about what really happened when they banned the phrase illegal alien and then reversed it. Them reversing it, again, I think, is kind of a signal where it's basically saying, hey, look, we know at some point the government may get involved here. And I can't even believe I'm saying that. And I can't even believe I'm advocating it, but I don't know what else to do. I mean, I'm conflicted about it. I'll talk more about this here in a minute. It is Johnny Cash Friday on Conduit News Radio. Thanks for starting the beginning of your weekend with us here at the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Back in just a moment.
President Pitzer, Mr. Vice President, Governor, Congressman Thomas, Senator Wiley and Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your President having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. And now, if America's new spacecraft succeeds in reaching Venus, we will have literally reached the stars before midnight tonight. This is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. New ignorance, new problems, new dangers. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this
All right,
state...
ladies and gentlemen. Speaking of the phrase illegal aliens, not supposed to use that anymore. At least 24 workers at an Arkansas food processing plant have been held in an immigration case. According to Dave Hughes, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette reporting here. Brian Cox, a spokesman for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, under which Homeland Security and investigations operate, would not say what agents were investigating Wednesday morning at Bryant Preserving Company. He said 24 people were detained. He said Wednesday afternoon that he did not have a specific number of employees who were detained because some were still being processed. Some had been released, he said. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District said that they were aware of the raid at the plant. Bryant Preserving released a statement Wednesday that said several plant employees were accused of document and identity fraud. It said Bryant Preserving was not a subject of the investigation. Quote, we follow all mandated verification procedures and also use E-Verify, a federal web-based system that allows enrolled employers to confirm the eligibility of their employees to work in the United States. Boy, before President Trump, you never heard of anything like this, or at least I certainly didn't. I find that fascinating. Anyway, I would encourage you to go ahead and give this Epic Times article a read. Twitter blocking ads with using words the illegal alien, then reverse his decision as the error. Michelle Malkin. You guys know Michelle Malkin? Obviously, most of you do. She was recently interviewed, and what she said was that these technology companies tightening control over the parameters of political speech and expression, it's got to be looked at, right? Quote, these companies cannot be treated as just any run-of-the-mill small business, not only because of their market cap, but because of their complete domination of the spaces by which most people in America in the 21st century are able to exercise their political free speech. That's how so much of my own social media and new media entrepreneur career has been possible. That's true. There are a lot of people out there who are able to reach, a worldwide audience because of the internet. And then you start to censor that, you could be affecting other people's businesses in a lot of ways. And by the way, she said all of this over at Breitbart News Tonight is where Michelle Malkin was interviewed. Anyway, so check it out. Hey, folks, we're up against a hard break. I'm going to be back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere on this Johnny Cash Friday. Thank you so much for listening. Do the show without you. Back in a minute.
Of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. William Bradford, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, It is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space. Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending
I just want to say one more thing. I want to say one more thing about big tech companies, Silicon Valley giants, censoring opinions that they disagree with politically. In light of, like Michelle Malkin said in that quote we read, in the 21st century, this is how Americans express political speech, okay? And so, is the answer the government get involved? I don't know. I mean, I tend to think that's a terrible idea. But at the same time, and listen, I know that the First Amendment only applies to the government, not private companies, and people are voluntarily using these private companies in the internet. But then again, at what point is the internet a public sidewalk? When it comes to free speech, because this is now how we are interacting with one another politically. This is how we're sharing information with one another, and it's been great to an extent because we're able to bypass the arbiters, the traditional gatekeepers of when all you had was CBS, ABC, or NBC, and whatever they said. And of course, the bias that is obvious in the mainstream media, I mean, think about this for a second. Do you think that do you remember when the Associated Press created the phrase white Hispanic to describe George Zimmerman, the guy who killed Trayvon Martin in that dispute? And they wanted it so bad to be a white guy, with like a Confederate battle flag T-shirt on or something like that. But it said it was no, George Zimmerman is a Hispanic. And it's like, oh, gosh, you know what? Blacks and Hispanics are not supposed to, they're not supposed to hate each other yet, because the media hasn't decided to frame it that way. They haven't decided to pit those two races against one another yet. And so they come up with a phrase. The Associated Press invents the phrase white Hispanic to promote this idea. If you ever think the Associated Press is not biased, just remember that. I mean, we know they are, but just remember the fact that they invent this phrase white Hispanic in order to foment racism and really divide this nation. Let's make it about race. Let's not make it about the human right to self-defense or whatever it was. And listen, I know George Zimmerman's not some stand-up guy or anything. I mean, I understand that, but anyway, if it wasn't for the internet, a lot of people wouldn't know that NBC News edited that 911 tape with George Zimmerman. Remember that? They selectively edited it to say that George Zimmerman was, killed him because he was black. The internet is a great tool. It's a great way to get information out there. And Hillary Clinton lost, according to the left, not because Hillary Clinton was the worst presidential candidate to run for office in American history. No, Hillary Clinton lost, and the Democrat Party's message of pronoun usage was rejected because the people had too much freedom on Facebook and Twitter. That's what they've now decided. And so now they're going to try to change that by making people less free on the internet. And they're private companies, yes, but they're being subverted by government all the time when it comes to the information collected. At what point are these private companies actually violating the First Amendment? It's a very difficult question to answer. But again, everybody's communicating politically on these platforms. This is the way people communicate now, a vast majority of people. So, well, maybe not Twitter. Twitter's a bubble in and of itself. I got to thinking about this. What if before the internet there was a middleman? That's essentially what we're talking about here. What if before the internet you wanted to protest, there was a middleman that would call up all your friends and tell them that you were protesting, or tell them your political opinion about something, or tell them that you used the phrase illegal alien, or and even that doesn't do it justice, because it doesn't really, because the internet is such an amazing piece of technology, and it's an amazing way to communicate with everybody else. And so as much as I've tried to conceptualize what the analogy would be, feel free to help me out. I keep coming to this. We've not been here before. This is uncharted territory. We've not been here before. Let me know what you think. I really would like to hear from this audience. What do you think about the Silicon Valley giants? Do you think they should be broken up? Do you think, are they monopolies? Or do you think, no, leave them alone, start your own conservative or freedom-based Facebook? You think that's what we should do? Or attempt to do? Well, how would you do that, right? How do you start something like that if you're relying on Google and, to get to the top of the search results? I mean, it's pretty clear that any type of social media competitor, is going to get Johnny sweep the legs from Google, Facebook, Twitter, and all these big guys, Now, one of the things Michelle Malkin said is that some of our Republican politicians are more worried about whether or not they're going to get donations from some of these Silicon Valley giants than they are of holding the line and recognizing what the power that is unchecked that they actually have to put their finger on the scales and tilt the scales. And they're going to do it because, see, they've bought into the phony Russia narrative. They think that Russia hacked our elections, and they think that Donald Trump colluded with Russia, and that's why he won. It wasn't because the left's message was terrible and Hillary Clinton was awful. It had nothing to do with that. It's because of Russia. So they already think that the election was stolen. There's a lot of people that have bought into this bogus CNN narrative that the election was stolen. And so don't put it past them. They think the election was stolen because CNN said so. And so, you know what? Now the Silicon Valley giants, well, two can play at that game. we'll steal the election for ourselves, or we'll play just as dirty as you played, when in reality Russia didn't collude with the Trump administration that we know of, and I don't think it happened. And also, I don't think Russian bots on Facebook or whatever they want to say swayed people's votes. I don't think that happened. Hello? It was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. It was a pretty easy decision based on who you are, right? I mean, it was pretty simple, pretty cut and dry. The gatekeepers of our society are mad that the American people can still sort of govern themselves with elections. And we chose poorly, as the knight says in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Here's some Arkansas news. According to John Moritz, the Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, Dan Kemp, has recused himself from hearing the lawsuit attempting to throw Issue 1 off the ballot. Now, a lower court has already thrown Issue 1 off of the ballot, saying that it illegally log rolls. Now, log rolling is a term that basically says that this one issue, this constitutional amendment that's on the ballot, Issue 1, by the way, is the bad tort reform amendment that sets a cap on human life and a lot of other stuff that's really, really bad. Log rolling is the concept of putting too many issues in one bill, right? So it's hard to understand. Meaning we need to have single issues, and because this thing puts a cap on, damages, arbitrary cap on human life, sets attorney fees, meaning you can't make over a certain amount of money, which is socialism, and also it lets the legislature set rules of evidence in a courtroom. It's just doing too many things with only one vote to do it. Maybe there might be some people that would say, well, I agree with the attorney part, but I don't agree with the cap. Or I agree with the cap, but I don't agree with the attorney part. Or I disagree with all those other things, but I do think the legislature should set rules of evidence, which I don't think that they should do any of those things. But you get my point, right? That's the idea, the concept of log rolling. And so that's why it was thrown off the ballot. And, of course, now it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Well, Chief Justice Dan Kemp has recused himself. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means now, from what I can tell, that Asa Hutchinson gets to now appoint a special justice, to rule on the matter, along with the rest of the Arkansas Supreme Court. Quote, recusals are at the discretion of individual justices. I expect to be able to act on this special appointment within the next week. Well, it does need to be quick because, we need to know. The election is coming up. It's still a ways out, but it's, we would like to know one way or the other. People need to mobilize. I think Issue 1, if it went to a vote right now, would be defeated. That's what I think. I think people really don't like this. Now, I guess, did Kemp gave a speech. That's what it was. So the annual conference of the Bar Association, Chief Justice Dan Kemp expressed that he wasn't in favor of Issue 1. Chief Justice Dan Kemp said he would vote against Issue 1. He also urged others to oppose the amendment. And so that would be why he recused himself, because he's a judge, the Chief Justice of the Arkansas Supreme Court, and he already came out and expressed an opinion on it. And so I think, that's to be expected. And I would also say that, if you just assume that it's going to go on the ballot, because that's what the political establishment and the Uniparty wants. The Uniparty wants it on the ballot because that's what the nursing homes and special interests want. Then it's probably going to go to a vote. And that's when the people are going to have to stand up and make a decision, and you're going to be inundated with ads on why it's good, why it's bad, and we'll be covering all of that. So, what else do we have here for this hour? Oh, yeah, we didn't get to go over this. I referenced this article yesterday, but I didn't go through it. Over at conduitforaction.org, there's a fantastic commentary about Senator Jim Hendren. Senator Jim Hendren recently went to the Benton County Republican Committee, and he compared Conduit to terrorists. Okay, he basically said that Conduit is like the Afghan nationals that they train, put on an American uniform, but then they walk into a tent and they start shooting at everybody, or sometimes they put on suicide vests. The headline here is that if you expose liberal voting records, you will be called a terrorist in Arkansas by, because it's Republicans who are voting liberal and expanding government, you'll be called a terrorist. So everybody knows, listening to this program, that Conduit supports limited government, lower taxes, more freedom. Those are the same concepts, the same principles that are in the Republican Party. It's not a complicated, not something new. It's not something radical. What's radical is telling people you're going to do one thing and then coming back to them with excuses as to why you just can't do it. It's because you didn't really believe it in the first place. Or maybe it's because you have familiar family relations in the governor's mansion and you realize, oh, the governor's just really, doesn't really, not as conservative as the rest of the state is, and he's going to lead us in a different direction. To Senator Jim Hendren's mind, the role of Conduit should be to support anyone who wears the Republican label, even if they vote with the Democrats. That's exactly right, and that's the mindset of a lot of establishment Republicans. He thinks that Conduit for Action is supposed to be his cheerleading squad and to zip our lips when Republican politicians prefer to operate out of the Democrat playbook so they can be players and deal makers in the game of big government. Sorry, but that's not why Conduit was formed. They were formed to support conservative principles, not personalities. Senator Jim Hendren was so upset that Conduit for Action exposed his weak voting record in 2017 that he made up his own scorecard and gave himself and his cohorts an excellent grade. Surprise, surprise. Instead of responding by voting conservative, his solution is to browbeat Republican county committees into no longer inviting Conduit to speak at Republican events. The Republican grassroots voters deserve to know if one of their office holders is pulling a snow job on them. When conservative principles are ignored by Republican politicians, they are also ignoring the Republican county committee members who serve on the state board to write and approve the Republican Party's principles and platform, and ignoring Republican grassroots voters who work so hard to elect people who they expect to support conservative principles through their actions. Hendren especially dislikes Conduit because Conduit's exposed his deceptions used to cover up liberal policies. And here's the list. Are you ready for this list, folks? It's epic. It really is. Remember when Jim Hendren sponsored his Uncle Ace's bill to establish a task force on health care? Hendren boldly declared the bill would end the private option, end Obamacare Medicaid expansion. Conduit dared to expose the truth. The bill did not move forward the scheduled end of the liberal program by even 1 second. Conduit dared to quote Hendren's own bill to show that the first priority of the bill was for the task force to recommend how to continue Obamacare. Conduit dared to expose the fact that the task force's consultant was not free to recommend what would be best for Arkansas and instead was required to recommend how to continue Obamacare. You seen a pattern here? Conduit dared to show that based on the voting records of the members of the task force was heavily stacked with supporters of Obamacare. Conduit correctly predicted the outcome would be the continuation of the program under a different name, and it was Jim Hendren himself who sponsored Uncle Ace's legislation to do just that under the new name Arkansas Works. When Hendren filed a bill with a title saying that it was going to prohibit Arkansas from establishing a state-based Obamacare exchange, he amended the bill so the body of the bill instead retained, not prohibited, the authority for the state-based Obamacare exchange unless the U.S. Supreme Court happened to rule against Obamacare in a way that would have effectively ended Obamacare. The authority for the exchange remains to this day because of Hendren's deception. Conduit exposed the deception, calling the title a lie. Hendren's response was to not defend his bill, which he couldn't, but to instead used another page out of the liberal playbook by playing the victim card for being exposed as a liar. Then you have Hendren sponsoring Uncle Ace's bill to create a tax task force. Conduit dared to point out that most of the members chosen for the task force he chairs had voted for more than one tax increase in 2017. Conduit exposed the task force's consultant as having a liberal tax and spend bias. Eventually, the task force dismissed the consultant for poor work. When the task force thought it would be a good idea to study increasing the tax rate on groceries, Conduit repeatedly publicized it until Governor Asa Hutchinson was pushed into a corner by his opponents to reject the idea. Conduit correctly predicted that the tax recommendations would use the same tax cut plan the Democrats always used. What is the plan the Democrats used? Claim tax cuts while growing government and keeping Arkansas a high tax rate state? The Democrats and now many Republicans look at state revenue growth, decide how much they want to use to keep growing government without ever evaluating which programs work and are needed, and then tithe a part of the remainder in the form of a tax cut. Look at the tax cut we got. Look at the tax cut we got you, but don't look at how much we grew government or how much state agencies wasted or how much was given away to favored corporations and communist countries, and certainly don't look at national rankings that show Arkansas continues to be a high-tax state. So in Senator Jim Hendren's eyes, Conduit are terrorists because Conduit is not acting like a team player to cover up liberal votes and actions. You can read more about this over at conduitforaction.org. And that's what happens, folks, when you, I don't know. You know, I don't understand why any Republican would say you don't need to have this person speak in public, you know? That's just sad. Back in a minute.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Around this globe of ours, there is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. It is for these reasons that I regard the decision last year to shift our efforts in space from low to high gear as among the most important decisions that will be made during my incumbency in the office of the presidency. In the last 24 hours, we have seen facilities now being created for the greatest and most complex exploration in man's history. We have felt the ground shake and the air shattered by the testing of a Saturn C-1 booster rocket, many times as powerful as the Atlas which launched John Glenn, generating power equivalents to 10,000 automobiles with their accelerator on the floor. We have seen the site where 5 F-1 rocket engines, each one as powerful as all 8 engines of the Saturn combined, will be clustered together to make the advanced Saturn missile, assembled in a new building to be built at Cape Canaveral, as tall as a 48-story structure, as wide as a city block, and as long as 2 lengths of this field. Within these last 19 months.
And welcome back to the program on this Johnny Cash Friday. When we come back here in just a moment, we'll be talking with Mr. Josh Waters. He's going to be talking with us about this story that's up right now over at conduitnews.com, where Micah Neal was sentenced yesterday. Micah Neal was sentenced to 3 years probation for accepting multiple bribes. So he's going to avoid jail time. So out of the 4 men involved in this scheme with Ecclesia College, 3 of them see jail time, one of them 18 years, and one of them probation. And the reason he's not getting jail time, folks, is because he cooperated initially. They wouldn't even have this case if it wasn't for Micah Neal. What kind of message does that send to other people who know the investigations are still going on, who know more indictments are coming? It says that you should come and cooperate with the government. That's what it says. It says come and flip on your friends so that you won't go to jail. It sends a message that the government will be lenient on you if you come with information that allows them to expose who the kingmakers are. That's what this is about. We'll be talking with Josh Waters here in 5 minutes. Also, Congressman Rick Crawford will be calling into the program at 7:33 this morning. So mark your clocks, or you want to tune in for that. Congressman Rick Crawford was in Arkansas earlier this week with Congressman Devin Nunes. Congressman Crawford brought him to Arkansas, and of course that's because they're both on the House Intel Committee. Speaking of that, what in the world are we going to find out? One of the key things, the key points of that Devin Nunes interview that Conduit News got was that we are going to see the FISA disclosures at some point. We're going to see the FISA application. I said, do you believe that the American people will get to look at the FISA documents and the disclosures, the applications? And he says, I do. Folks, apparently the stuff in there are full of smoking guns. That's the speculation. It's Johnny Cash Friday, 1 more hour coming your way next.
At least 45 satellites have circled the Earth. Some 40 of them were made in the United States of America, and they were far more sophisticated and supplied far more knowledge to the people of the world than those of the Soviet Union. The Mariner spacecraft
and time of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Time, 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM.
The Mariner spacecraft, now on its way to Venus, is the most intricate instrument in the history of space science. The accuracy of that shot is comparable to firing a missile from Cape Canaveral and dropping it in this stadium between the 40-yard lines. Transit satellites are helping our ships at sea to steer a safer course. Tyrus satellites have given us unprecedented warnings of hurricanes and storms, and will do the same for forest fires and icebergs. We have had our failures, but so have others, even if they do not admit them, and they may be less public. To be sure, we are behind, and will be behind for some time in manned flight. But we do not intend to stay behind, and in this decade we shall make up and move ahead. The growth of our science and education will be enriched by new knowledge of our universe and environment, by new techniques of learning and mapping and observation, by new tools and computers for industry, medicine, and the home as well as the school. Technical institutions such as Rice will reap the harvest of these gains. And finally, the space effort itself, while still in its infancy, has already created a great number of new companies and tens and thousands of new jobs. Space and related industries are generating new demands in investment and skilled personnel, and this city and this state and this region will share greatly in this growth. What was once the furthest outpost on the old frontier of the West will be the furthest outpost on the new frontier of science and space. Houston, your city of Houston, with its manned spacecraft center, will become the heart of a large scientific and engineering community. During the next 5 years, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration expects to double the number of scientists and engineers in this area, to increase its outlays for salaries and expenses to $60 million a year, to invest some $200 million in plant and laboratory facilities, and to direct or contract for new space efforts over $1 billion from this center in this city. To be sure, all this costs us all a good deal of money. This year's space budget is 3 times what it was in January 1961, and it is greater than the space budget of the previous 8 years combined. That budget now stands at $5.4 billion a year, a staggering sum, though somewhat less than we pay for cigarettes and cigars every year. Space expenditures will soon rise some more, from 40 cents per person per week to more than 50 cents a week for every man, woman, and child in the United States. For we have given this program a high national priority, even though I realize that this is, in some measure, an act of faith and vision, for we do not now know what benefits await us. But if I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, welcome to Hour 2. Thank you so much for being with us on this Johnny Cash Friday, and we might as well real quick. We gotta do our little top of the hour thing for Johnny Cash Friday. There we go. A day where we listen to as much Johnny Cash music as we can, while at the same time peppering in the news and events of the day. Hey, welcome to the program. Once again, we've got Mr. Josh Waters is with us. Josh, thanks so much for waking up with us this morning.
Hey, yeah, good morning, Paul.
So you were in the courtroom. The big news today is that we have former legislator Micah Neal yesterday was sentenced to 3 years probation for accepting multiple bribes. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it was from last week, starting with John Woods, Randall Shelton sentenced last week, and Orrin Paris Wednesday, and then, Micah Neal yesterday. It was really, as it progressed, we saw the severity of the crimes play out, and then how each of those defendants, how they cooperated, how that affected their sentence, all the way from John Woods not cooperating at all, really showing no remorse. The judge talking about how he had a depraved heart and a criminal mentality, got 18 years. And then yesterday, Micah Neal came forward right away. The government didn't ask him to come forward. He just came forward, fully cooperated. And they really stressed that yesterday. It was kind of unprecedented cooperation. And he got 3 years probation. And so the message that was sent yesterday, according to Dat Keys and the judge, and I think everyone really in the courtroom was, if you come forward immediately or honest and cooperate, you're going to, still face serious consequences, but not as serious as 18 years in prison.
Yeah.
So that was the message that came out yesterday.
So this recap over at conduitnews.com, prosecutors made a motion for a 10-level adjustment downward for Neal because of his good faith cooperation with prosecutors. Now, I know that's legalese to some of us, it is to me, but not to you, Josh Waters. So a 10-level adjustment, what does it mean?
So whenever someone is being sentenced, basically what they look at as far as guideline is kind of 2 entry points on the grid is how Judge Brooks describes it. And so basically they get points. And so based on, the seriousness of the offense, they get so many points. There's some other level enhancement. So in this case, Micah Neal starting out did get a level enhancement for being a elected official. He got a 2, that was, I think, a 4-level enhancement. He got a 12 or 14 level enhancement because the amount of money was over $500,000 that had been bribed. He got a 2-level enhancement for multiple bribes. And so when you add all that up, there's a point system, and then you look at that point system and how it compares to the grid, and that recommends basically a guideline sentence of, X amount of months based on the seriousness of the crime. And so at the beginning of the morning, whenever the judge went first through all those steps, Micah Neal was facing 7 to 9 years in prison. And so what he did first was, on motion by the prosecutors, he accepted a motion that would basically take off 10 points and take Micah Neal down on that guideline sentence. But even after he took the 10-level adjustment down, he was still facing 3 to 4 years because of the seriousness of the crime. So that's what they did first. And then by the end of the day, though, the judge, that's just a recommendation. The judge still has the final authority. And at the end of the day, the judge did grant the defendant's request for probation. He will have to have 1 year home confinement as part of his sentence, and then pay back $200,000 in restitution over the next 3 years.
And, it's also worth of note here that former state representative Mike Neal, he'll also, he's got to be at home for 1 year, but he's going to be able to go to work, and he's going to be able to go to church as part of this sentence.
Yes.
And the reason I want to bring that up, Josh, is I just want people to understand, like you said, what a message this is for people who are going to come forward and, I'm just going to say it, rat on the schemes that are going on. And, Mike Neal comes forward when he gets wind that there is an investigation going, and he's like, you know what? I did it, and it was wrong. And so I think there are other people who are probably listening to this broadcast right now. There are who know of what's going on, and you need to cooperate, and you need to come forward. And here's the other news, Josh. The Arkansas Democrat-Gazette reporting that there are more indictments to come. Did you hear that?
Yes, that was something we've been hearing, but was just reiterated yesterday that there's more investigations going on, and a big reason the prosecutors said that Neal deserved some leniency, even more so than many were expecting, because not only did he cooperate in this case in bringing, John Woods and Randall Shelton and to some extent, Orrin Parrish to justice, he's been helping in other corruption cases around the state and has agreed to continue helping in other investigations that are still ongoing. So he seems to be playing a pretty big role in how all of these public corruption cases that are being played out, the judge referred to it as a dragnet of corruption across the state and even up into Missouri, as we're saying. So that was a point that was made as well, as not only did he cooperate in this specific case, but he's cooperating in other cases of public corruption around the state.
And back on this Conduit news piece, there's a point in the article I read where the judge asked Mike Neal if there was basically a culture of corruption down there. You remember that part? What exactly was the judge getting at?
So, in my opinion, this was kind of a first opportunity for the judge to ask directly, Mike Neal, state legislator, because I don't think John Woods just didn't say anything. He didn't make a statement. But after Mike Neal's statement, the judge kind of asked him directly about a comment that Mike Neal made in a text message. And the comment Neal made was that, how can we make some money, in a message to John Woods, talking about kind of going back to, he saw how John Woods had all this nice stuff, was obviously making some money. How could he do that? And the judge pushed it on that, how, just a few months into him serving in the legislature, what was it about being down there that made that such a casual and normal thing to say? Is it just expected that when you go down there, you're going to, get paid off? And those aren't exact words from the judge, but that was basically what he was getting at. He was trying to get some insight kind of for the first time of, what is this culture of corruption? Why is it like this? And so Neal, wasn't just totally, yeah, it's awful, terrible. He said it happens more than people think. And whenever the judge asked, was it more about him just getting money, or is that just the culture, and he was just getting his piece kind of? And he said he thought it was kind of a little bit of both. And so, that has to be a recurring theme in all this is, the atmosphere down at the Marble Palace, at least at that time, and to an extent maybe still today, is that, kind of how Mike Neal said, it's kind of an unspoken thought that you go down there, there's ways for people to take care of you, to pay you off, and you're going to personally benefit in some way. And so I think the sentence of 18 years for John Woods, they tried to send a clear message that we're not going to put up with that. That's not going to happen. And Dak Keith talked a little bit about that at the press conference afterwards. But they also sent a message with Mike Neal saying, if this happens and you know about stuff that's happened, come forward now and cooperate.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The cooperation, you got to think that there's, if the investigations are still going on, Dak Keith saying, more indictments to come, but, can't comment further. You got to think there's a lot of really nervous people out there. And there's, presumably there's people that understand what all these schemes are and know them, inside and out. Now, one of those individuals is clearly Milton Rusty Cranford, who is, been in jail for a while because he tried to have a guy killed up in New Jersey, up in Missouri. That's the case out of the Western District of Missouri. He clearly is the linchpin, I think, to a lot of this. I mean, he's got his hand in all kinds of stuff. But I'm curious now. I mean, my interest is piqued. You kind of assume that Micah Neal is done now, But the fact that he's continuing to help them out with investigations, I mean, what else does he know? What other conversations has he been privy to? And where is he directing investigators, And that, to me, is probably something that other people involved in these schemes are very worried about this morning as they read the news. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I really picked up on the news conference. I felt like, the U.S. attorney and the kind of statements that came out in the courtroom, they were somewhat telegraphing to other people out there, hey, if you know something, it's in your best interest long term. It might not, be good short term. Your name is going to come up probably. And that's something, too, they stressed how Micah Neal was very public with this. He came forward publicly. He said other people have come forward privately and secretly, but Micah Neal came forward publicly. And so they really were telegraphing, Paul, and I don't know how much, is needed, that they need more people to come forward, but they at least put it out there in a clear message, in a clear sentence, that if you know something, come forward, cooperate, and if you do that, you're not going to be facing a serious, time as what John Woods got, 18 years, compared to Micah Neal's 3-year probation.
A couple, I was on vacation last week, but there was a bunch of stories that broke on Conduit News last week about John Woods and about, Randall Shelton and everything else in their sentencing. In one of those stories, there was a question asked of that case about whether or not there will be, is this the end of the people charged in connection specifically with Ecclesia College? Josh, do you remember what his response was to that question?
Yes, I asked him that after the Randall Shelton hearing is, can we assume that these other legislators, because, Paul, specifically with Randall Shelton's case, some of the GIF money that was directed to Arkansas Health and Economic Research, the only legislators that directed that were Micah Neal, John Woods, and Senator Bart Hester. And Senator Hester has not been charged with anything. And then when you look at Ecclesia College, there was several other legislators who did direct money to Ecclesia College. And so, the question was, can we assume any of those legislators will not be charged? And at that time he said it was, too soon to say that. And at this point, with as many investigations as there seems to be going on, I don't think they can definitively say much of anything. But at that time he said, we can't say. Okay. He said they hope to be able to say at some point something definitive like, this is kind of closed, this part of it, and go on. But at that time he couldn't say. So, yeah. I mean, that just kind of, not piques your interest, but just kind of urges your brow, kind of thinking, man, this, when is it going to end, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When is it going to end? I have no idea. But the culture of corruption down there, at least it's, people are talking about it. It's no longer in the abstract. It's real. It's no longer, the stuff that we've been saying, Josh, that Conduit has been saying, it hasn't been sensationalized. It's not something that's just been made up. Hey, you dirty politicians and all politicians. No, there's a pattern here, and we've been saying this for a long time that there's something down there that really stinks, and now we're actually seeing the Justice Department get involved. And I want to thank these U.S. attorneys. I know we know a lot that we wouldn't know if it wasn't for the Western District of Missouri U.S. attorneys, but Dak Keese and Cody Highland. I just want to continue to publicly encourage them, because the people of Arkansas really have a crisis right now. I mean, we don't really have confidence in our own government, and slowly but surely it seems that confidence is going to be hopefully increased again to where we have a more honest government, because these guys are going to wind up being prosecuted and exposed.
Yeah, that's a very poignant point. That's something Mike O'Neill said yesterday in his statement. Was he apologized to the General Assembly, and he apologized to other legislators because how he has basically lowered the bar of public trust. Him and others too. It's not just him, but he did mention that specifically. So I think that's a reality that legislators feel and see right now, is that based with all this public corruption, it's hard to really trust what they're doing down there. And until everyone fully comes forward, everyone's really prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and kind of all this works itself out. I think until that happens, and people know, what else could be out there and kind of maybe what should be coming. And so until all that happens, I think people are still going to have a hard time trusting our legislature. And that, that's a really sad thing, Paul, because our republic and Judge Brooks really, pushed this. The oath that these legislators took, is a very serious oath to defend the laws and to represent the people. And to undermine that by stealing money, to taking bribes, and just, the rampant corruption just really undermines the public trust and really the backbone of our republic, that we can trust our public officials to do what's in the best interest of the people and not themselves.
Josh Waters, as always, thanks for the great reporting and updates, and you have a great weekend, okay?
All right. Thanks, Paul. You too.
All righty, folks. It is Johnny Cash Friday. For our online audience, you guys are listening to President Kennedy's 1962 address at Rush University, saying we're going to the moon. We're going to be back in a moment.
President Pitzer, Mr. Vice President, Governor, Congressman Thomas, Senator Wiley and Congressman Miller, Mr. Webb, Mr. Bell, scientists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your president having made me an honorary visiting professor, and I will assure you that my first lecture will be very brief. I am delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted to be here on this occasion. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Despite the striking fact that most of the scientists that the world has ever known are alive and working today, despite the fact that this nation's own scientific manpower is doubling every 12 years in a rate of growth more than 3 times that of our population as a whole, despite that, the vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
and now,
welcome back
if
this Friday.
America's
Thanks for
new
starting the beginning of
spacecraft
your weekend
succeeds
with
in
us
reaching
here
Venus,
at the
we
intersection
will
of
have
conservative
literally
ideas
reached
and
the
reality.
stars before
We're
midnight.
building a liberty machine. Okay, so there's a great interview with Josh Waters. We'll have that sectioned out, and we'll have it up at conduitnews.com sometime today. By the way, don't forget to go to conduitnews.com and sign up for the newsletter if you want a weekly email of all the stuff that you might have missed, the interviews with different people and that sort of thing. We'd love to be able to get that to you. So a few of your comments on Facebook. Bob on Facebook writes, what we have is a catastrophic failure of confidence in our state government. That's exactly right. A lot of people feel that way, Bob. You're exactly right. Jackie on Facebook, and that's why people are upset with the Republican Party. Mr. Hendren. Interesting. You know, the fallout of Jim Hendren revealing that he is, in fact, the redacted name in court documents from the John Woods case, that John Woods came to him and asked for $10,000 for John Woods to not run against Jim Hendren in a Republican primary. That's pretty incredible stuff, considering that Hendren refused to wear a wire to do so. The FBI wanted him to wear a wire. He said he refused to cooperate with the FBI. Let's just say that he refused to cooperate with the FBI. And now, so he reported it, but he refused to cooperate. Isn't that that's different than it's just interesting, right? Why wouldn't you want to try to take John Woods out when he's that dirty, when he's a scoundrel, if you know what I'm saying? And then Jim Hendren did not file an ethics complaint. He didn't try to go after John Woods in any way. And now he's concerned with the reputation of the Arkansas Senate. Now he's concerned, and he's trying to, quote, lead on ethics reform. He's trying to say, well, we set up a brand new ethics committee and blah, 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 blah. I'll tell you something. I wonder what Judge Tim Brooks thinks of all of this. Well, all right, here's what I mean by that. Tim Brooks, the judge in the John Woods case, he knows that Jim Hendren's name is in those documents. He knows that Jim Hendren, presumably was a potential witness because he did offer to testify against John Woods, but he was never called. And then he sees, Jeremy Hutchinson's name as Senator A referenced in this guilty plea or that guilty plea. And then, it's a frenzy, and it actually penetrates the bubble of the Marble Palace where people start to think, oh, my goodness, the people are starting to find out how things are what things are done down here. And so in order to try to, wall off or dam up the possible flood that's coming of the voters, a flood of anger from the voters, Jim Hendren calls a press conference, refuses to admit the press conference is about Jeremy Hutchinson being implicated in receiving $500,000 in bribes, and instead says, we're going to change the rules because the Senate has a problem. We're going to set up an ethics committee, and don't worry, senators will tattle on other senators, when he himself refused to file an ethics complaint that you could do right now against John Woods seeking a $10,000 bribe from him, and he refused to cooperate with the FBI. Excuse my skepticism that you're actually concerned with the reputation of the Arkansas Senate. I think you're only concerned because now everybody found out about it. Everybody's found out about how bad it is, and now you want to do something. But you see, if you had done something when not as many people knew what was going on as they do now, you would have been, what? I mean, the Marble Palace establishment would have probably punished you. Maybe you wouldn't have been the majority leader. Maybe you wouldn't be the incoming president pro temp of the Senate if they knew that you weren't willing to play ball. I think of that conversation between Jim Gordon and the dirty cop in The Dark Knight, We've got to take a break. Back in a minute.
Tonight, this is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. New ignorance, new problems, new dangers. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. But this city of Houston, this state of Texas, this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. William Bradford, speaking in 1630 of the founding of the Plymouth Bay Colony, said that all great and honorable actions are accompanied with great difficulties, and both must be enterprised and overcome with answerable courage. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space. Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of...
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is Johnny Cash Friday. Thanks for starting the beginning of your weekend with us. I hope it's a fantastic one for you. We're kind of in the home stretch here. Welcome back to the program. We've got Congressman Rick Crawford is on the line. Rick, it's always great to have you on, sir.
Hey, good to be with you.
I just want to say I had an incredible time interviewing your colleague, House Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. It was great that he was in Arkansas, and I know you were instrumental in getting him here.
Well, yeah, we served together on the Intel Committee. He's done some remarkable work, and but for his tenacity and leadership on this issue, we might not know anything about this business with Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, the business with Bruce Orr, Fusion GPS, the dossier, all this kind of stuff. So, it's been pretty important a couple of years.
It really, really has. And like you said, he is, kind of on the forefront of this. But I just am really thankful that you're on that committee as well. I mean, and we have an Arkansas delegate that's up there, pursuing these facts and this truth. And the media in so many instances is reporting what's dubbed fake news, and now we're getting these reports that the FBI and the DOJ, or the senior officials, they have this pattern of leaking information to stories, and in some cases they leak the information, then they use the news report to justify getting a FISA warrant. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Well, I hope people just really take a minute to digest what you just said. And that is, it's not that we're being anti-FBI, anti-law enforcement. I mean, for crying out loud, the Democrats are calling for dismantling ICE. That's a Democratic tenet. We're not that. That's not our platform. Our platform is to hold accountable any federal agency. That's our job. That's our constitutional mandate. That's the oversight requirement that we have as members of Congress, because I don't care what federal agency it is. Who's overseeing them if not Congress? We are co-equal, separate branch of government, and the administration, is the executive branch, that's the agency. That's the FBI, the Department of Justice, the EPA, the USDA, the Department of the Interior, you name it. And we have the responsibility, and actually the constitutional mandate, to oversee those agencies. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? And so, these people that are charged with law enforcement, God bless them, the rank and file FBI, I don't have a problem with them at all. In fact, the rank and file FBI, they're the ones that have a problem with their leadership. And if you ask these members that are out on the streets, that are out in the forward deployed areas around the world representing the United States and trying to make sure that, bad actors are brought to justice, they are not happy with this leadership and this cabal in Washington that's set about to try and dismantle the Trump campaign and really affect the outcome of the election. You want to talk about Russia collusion? We've got all the evidence you need to point to Hillary Clinton campaign and several DOJ officials that themselves were colluding with Russia to affect the outcome of the election. And so this is what this evidence is pointing to. And we said from the very beginning, we're going to go where the facts take us. And the facts have taken us and point to the irony of this whole thing is that the ones that were screaming about Russia collusion were the ones who were themselves engaged in Russia collusion.
Projection and deflection. Project the very thing you're guilty on, or you're guilty of on your opponents. That certainly seems about what we're seeing here. One of the things I got to ask Chairman Nunes was, because people have been talking about declassification of some documents this week, the Broussard documents and that sort of thing. But I asked him, I said, do you think the American people are ever going to get to actually see the FISA applications in the documents? And he said, yes, I believe that they will. Do you think that as well?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously a process by which this happens. There's probably one of two or three ways that where this could materialize, and certainly the president is going to have a say in that. He ultimately can declassify something. What we have to do is make sure that we weigh this and are very careful and circumspect in this whole process, that we don't create more problems than we're seeking to solve. And so that's why we got to get a lot of legal eyes on this to make sure that everything that we do is done appropriately so as not to compromise. You've heard the term sources and methods.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be careful that we're not disclosing sources and methods, and that's always a key consideration when you're declassifying, particularly this type of information. But it's interesting to note that there's a couple of things that people should be aware of. What these DOJ officials did was they initiated a counterintelligence investigation. So you might hear it called a CI investigation, a counterintelligence investigation against the U.S. citizen, not only a U.S. citizen, but a political campaign. First time in history that's ever happened. So if you got a problem with this campaign from a legal standpoint, then just initiate an investigation. It doesn't need to be intelligence. So what they did was they leveraged, really, and I think misled the FISA court so that they could use the CI umbrella, an enterprise investigation, which basically means they're simply, no defined parameters with no timeline, and gives them all kinds of latitude to do whatever they want. And keeping in mind, of course, that this is a U.S. citizen and a political campaign. I mean, there's no precedent for this at all. I mean, it's the first time it's ever happened, I believe, in history. And so, you've got to wonder at this point, did these DOJ officials just do this of their own accord because they were just that amped up against the possibility of a Trump presidency, or was there some directive from higher up or somebody that said, hey, y'all need to do this because we got to make sure that Hillary wins, and so whatever you got to do to ensure that happens, go on ahead and do it. Use whatever means necessary to make that happen. I don't know. We'll get the answer to those questions at some point in time, but what we do know is if there was evidence of collusion on the part of the Trump campaign, you can bet we'd know about it. Not only would we have uncovered it, but you can bet that Adam Schiff would have gone straight to the first camera he saw and told everything he knew, because that's exactly what he does.
I've been, when it all comes out and when everything's, when it's all said and done, I just hope that the media, I hope the media actually reports on it. And when I mean the media, I mean the mainstream media, the ones that have sensationalized this idea of Russia collusion, and they've got a significant portion of the country that believes that somehow Donald Trump stole the election, and so they don't have to confront the fact that leftism was rejected. Maybe people are more concerned with the economy than they are with what pronouns that they need to use to be politically correct. And so because of that, and I mentioned this in the first hour, because there's a lot of people that think that the election was somehow, Russia influenced, or let's just say it was stolen from the Democrats. They don't want to admit that Hillary might be the worst candidate ever. Now we have these Silicon Valley giants that appear to be putting their thumbs on the scale here by censoring conservative content and things like that. And I don't know, and this is an honest question, I don't know, does the government get involved here eventually? Are they monopolies? What happens, Congressman Crawford? The reality is, most Americans now are disseminating political information, expressing themselves using these, quote, private companies. I mean, they are private, but it's a kind of a train wreck that we're headed for, and I don't really know what the answer is.
Well, here's what I want to encourage people to do. This is a market-based solution, and we have gotten so dependent on what are essentially now de facto utilities, things like Google and Twitter and Facebook. I shut my Facebook accounts down for a variety of reasons, and guess what? I still woke up the next morning, and the world continued to turn. So I am really hesitant to say we need to regulate these private entities, but I think there needs to be, from a government standpoint, but I think the American people need to make a determination, is this something they want to continue to support? And when people get tired of it, they'll vote with their feet, and the marketplace will do the work for them. At some point in time, these companies have to change their business model, and I'm talking about from the standpoint of, filtering content that they don't particularly like. That's not necessarily a criminal offense. It's not necessarily something that requires government regulation. When these companies start breaking the law, when they start violating people's civil liberties, that's when the government will take a role. But from the standpoint of censoring, it's not a government entity. It's a marketplace, and this is a marketplace dynamic. And so I hope that people recognize that and will take the appropriate action themselves to correct the marketplace. As long as you give them their services, but they have no incentive to change. But if people quit using their services, if people drop Twitter and drop Facebook and drop whatever other, tech services out there that, purports to make their lives better. If they say, I'm not going to use it anymore because I don't think you're running a fair organization or something that's, a good service to me as a conservative, then stop using it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in time, they'll get the message. But I don't think at this point, we have risen to the level of government regulation. And I think what you've got to be careful about is if you do that, you might confer status on them as potentially a utility, which then gives them standing to run as sort of a legal monopoly. Just like we only have one utility company that provides power in the city, right? And that's a legal entity, and so that's okay. Well, we don't want to confer that status on these businesses because then that probably helps them escape scrutiny and helps them escape the consequences of a market-based consumer reaction.
Yeah, I definitely. I guess I see what you're saying, and I think I just wonder, in order for that to happen, in order for people to vote with their feet in a way and quit using it, I just wonder if there's going to be more revelations as to exactly what some of these companies have been doing. Whether it's privacy or whatever the case may be, because my whole thing is if you were to start, let's say, a competitor to Facebook, are you inevitably going to be relying on Google to get it to the top of the search results? And these companies seem to almost be colluding against conservatives. Sure. Go ahead.
Oh, I absolutely think that there is a level of collusion there in the marketplace with regard to tech companies that rely on each other to advance their own bottom line. And let's keep in mind that that's what this is about. This is about advancing their own bottom lines. And in the process, you find that Facebook, Google, Twitter, whatever, do provide a service and make your life easier to some degree. But, life wasn't necessarily all that bad before we had those things. I'm not suggesting we go backwards, but what I am suggesting is that if you don't like what's taking place in the marketplace, do something about it. There's a variety of things people can do. Why do we not have an alternative to Google? Well, Google got so big, and we allowed them to. They got so big that no one else has been able to come in and replicate that and be competitive. And I think, quite frankly, that the tech cabal that exists in Silicon Valley is content with that because you handle that. We'll handle this. Okay. So Google, you go do your thing over there. Twitter, we'll go do our thing over here. Amazon, you're set up over there, and they kind of got it all worked out together as they kind of chop up the marketplace in various pieces. And here's what's going on. But unless and until some other people recognize, there's room to move in the marketplace, and we can do some things differently. And this is what we're going to be up against. We're going to be up against these tech giants, and this is really bottom line driven. So I don't know. Look, if I could write an algorithm to replace Google, I'd do it today. I'm not smart enough to do that, but there's people out there that are. They've just got to be capitalized well enough that they can go out and challenge these tech companies. And I'd like to see some startups move away from Silicon Valley. I've been out there and I've talked to these 40-pound brains before, and they don't have anything that we don't have. They just have an established system out there that allows folks, under the right circumstances, to be able to bring something to the market. And it's taken place over a period of years, and it's not that it can't be replicated elsewhere. It's just that's where it has. They have coalesced around this tech corridor in Silicon Valley, and that's where all the things happen. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is right now.
Congressman Rick Crawford, I appreciate it. It's always great, and I love the discussion and your thoughts on these subjects. And I know the people of Arkansas are, excited about the work you're doing and pleased with what you're doing on the House Intel Committee. And I can't thank you enough, sir.
You bet. My privilege.
All
Thanks,
right.
man.
Yes. Have a great weekend. Folks, it is Johnny Cash Friday. And whoa. There we go. We have we have Johnny Cash Friday, and we're going to take a break, and we'll be back here in just a moment. Thanks for listening.
Can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war? I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone.
If you believe the Second Amendment protects your right to defend your home with a firearm, where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government. And the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war? I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly
All right,
the
folks,
Atlantic?
welcome back.
Why does Rice play Texas?
I have one
We
more
choose
story
to
I
go
want
to
to
the
get
moon.
to today. It's based on national news, and it is really, really important. And if you read anything over the weekend, I would encourage you to read this story by Lee Smith over at Real Clear Investigations. The headline here, and the whole story gives you great insight into what actually has been going on. Headline is How Anti-Trump Leakers Moved from Offense to Defense. A trail of evidence appearing in major news outlets suggests a campaign to undermine President Trump from within the government through illegal leaks of classified information and then thwart congressional investigators probing the disclosures. On Monday, the Justice Department released a handful of texts and other documents that included two former officials known for their anti-Trump bias, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page of the FBI, discussing the DOJ's media leak strategy. Strzok now says, through his lawyer, that strategy was aimed at preventing leaks. Nevertheless, days later, he and Page approvingly mentioned forthcoming news articles critical of Trump associates. Quote, the leaks have been coming out of the FBI and DOJ since 2016. The leaks that are coming out of them are unconscionable, said retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent James Gagliano. There's a difference between whistleblowing and leaking for self-serving or partisan purposes. Past and present, U.S. officials say the template for the leak campaign can be traced back to the Obama administration's efforts to sell the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which made the press reliant on background conversations and favorable leaks from government officials. Obama advisor Ben Rhodes told the New York Times in 2016 that we created an echo chamber that helped retail the administration's narrative. That same configuration, says Michael Doran, a senior official in the George W. Bush White House, the press, political operatives, newly minted experts, social media validators, was repurposed to target Trump, his campaign, transition team, then presidency. The echo chamber's primary instrument in attacking the current White House, says Doran, is the Russia collusion narrative. Real Clear Investigations found that the anti-Trump leaks fall into two broad categories or phases. Initially, leaking was an offensive operation aimed at disrupting Trump's agenda, especially through leaks alleging connections between his campaign and the Russians. Its early successes, including leaks of highly classified material that led to the firing of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the recusal of Attorney General Jeff Sessions from overseeing that probe. The second phase, which began roughly a year into the Trump administration, has been more defensive, pushing back against congressional oversight committees that had uncovered irregularities in the FBI's investigation of Trump. This phase has been marked by the willingness of press outlets to run stories backing off earlier reported leaks that proved to be deeply misleading, including the roots of the FBI's investigation of the Trump campaign and the relationship between Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr and the opposition research firm that produced a central document of that probe, the largely discredited Steele dossier. If you read anything this weekend, continue reading this piece. Again, how anti-Trump leakers move from offense to defense. It analyzes media reports. It is really, really comprehensive and specifically detailed. It is excellent reporting. Again, Real Clear Investigations by Lee Smith. Arkansas, have a great weekend. Be safe.